Family members of September 11th victims spoke to the press today about the federal investigation into the terrorist attacks. The group called 9/11 CitizensWatch hosted this 90-minute news conference.
Is C-SPAN ready? Yes. Welcome everyone. My name is Kyle Hentz. I am co-founder with John Judge of 9/11 CitizensWatch. And today we're joined by several victim family members and survivors of 9/11, the 9/11 attacks, who you'll be introduced to and hearing from shortly. I welcome you all of you here today to our first press conference at the Press Club, the first of several that we will hold between now and the conclusion of our review of the declassified report that the 9/11 Commission will produce later this year. Welcome to members of the press, and especially to C-SPAN viewers. We have a lot of ground to cover in a short time, so we'll begin first by saying thank yous. First, thank you to C-SPAN. As is so often said, the viewers of C-SPAN, thanks for C-SPAN. And so we owe a big debt of gratitude for C-SPAN for bringing our message out to the American people. Thanks also to all the 9/11 family members and their supporters who have been keeping a watchful eye on the government's official 9/11 investigation known as the 9/11 Commission, and especially to those who have joined us here today. So what is CitizensWatch? CitizensWatch is an independent, nonpartisan group working to ensure that the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States and other related investigations respond fully to the concerns of both victim families and the public, and B, addresses the questions that remain unanswered about what happened, how and why it happened, and who is ultimately responsible. We launched our group at the first 9/11 Commission hearings in April, almost a year ago. It was held at the Customs House in New York City. Our watchwords are truth, accountability, and transparency. We're here to stand up for the principal rights of Americans to liberty and honest, accountable government. We are far from realizing the ideals of our founders. It is important to note that we don't formally speak for any of the 9/11 survivors or victim family members. We do, however, find ourselves more often than not in supportive of the positions and the questions that they have been putting forward over the last 2 years. We're particularly been impressed with the quality of the work and the questions that have been raised by the 9/11 Family Steering Committee for an Independent Commission, which is a small group of 9/11, mostly widows, who have been monitoring the course of the investigation that had a big hand in creating the commission in the first place. Were it not for their efforts and with the help of many other family members and concerned citizens, there would be no 9/11 Commission. And these hearings that are coming tomorrow and Wednesday would not be happening. Family members and survivors are active in a variety of groups and voice a range of concerns and views through independent organizations on issues from the 9/11 memorial to ground zero health concerns. And I've just learned from April that there's a new group that's going to be looking at the charities, the 9/11 charities, keeping an eye on them as well. We're here today to demand answers and accountability for what happened on 9/11 in a process that is open, transparent, and uncompromising. We deserve nothing less. The stakes could not be higher as the world has been swept up in a whirlwind of change and escalating violence since 9/11. Meanwhile, inside the Beltway, business as usual continues. To date, no one in government, not a single government official, has been held directly responsible, accountable for the apparent, as yet unexplained, simultaneous, massive, across-the-board failure of every single defensive and intelligence measure this country had established. And this, despite many warnings that the families and others have detailed in the months since the attacks and years since the attacks. In fact, what we have witnessed is a pattern of stonewalling and slow walking by the White House, the FAA, NORAD, and other agencies. This investigation would not have, again, I've already been there. Today we intend to outline our expectations for the Commission in its final months by presenting just a few of what we feel are the important questions that must be answered to ensure the security of our nation. Through this process, we hope to see the truth emerge and all of those responsible at whatever level are held accountable. So now I'd like to introduce one of my favorite conservative Republicans, Catherine Austin Fitts. Catherine is a former Bush 1 official. She was Secretary of Housing under the first Bush administration, and she was Managing Director of Dillon Reed Investment Bank. Catherine?
So, Kyle, I have to interrupt. I want to ask a little bit more about your group.
No, questions will be at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you. I'd like to thank Kyle and Citizens Watch and everybody participating today for everything you're doing. Kyle spoke about accountability and transparency. Many of the unanswered questions of 9/11 relate to accountability and transparency. Both accountability and transparency with respect to what has happened, but also about whether or not 9/11 is being used as a pretext, and the response to 9/11 is being used as a pretext to suppress accountability and transparency. And that is the basis of the first question I would like to describe today. Coming into 9/11, the Appropriations Subcommittee for Defense was having a very challenging summer, and that was because over $3.3 trillion of undocumentable adjustments were reported in the process of the Department of Defense refusing to produce audited financial statements. In response to 9/11, the Army used 9/11 as a pretext to say that it could not produce audited financial statements for fiscal 2001. My question relates to national security, not just as it is driven by military and intelligence performance, but by financial performance. The many blessings that all of us in this room enjoy relate very much to the soundness and integrity of our financial arrangements. When the federal government refuses to produce audited financial statements and uses the tragedy of 9/11 as a pretext to not do so, those financial arrangements can be called into question, not just in America, but by creditors and people who use our currency around the world. So my question for all the elected officials of Washington is, where's the $3.3 trillion missing from the Department of Defense and through the Department of Defense at the U.S. Treasury? And what does that say about our securities arrangements and our financial arrangements and how that impacts our financial security? With that, I would like to introduce a second former government official. Michael Springman is a veteran of the State Department. He was with us, with Kyle and me 2 years ago at our presentation here at the National Press Club. It was an astonishing performance, and it's wonderful to have him back. Michael Springman?
Can you spell your name?
My name is Catherine Austin Fitts. Catherine with a C, Austin, A-U-S-T-I-N, like in Texas, Fitts, F-I-T-T-S.
Thank you. I'm Mike Springman. I'm an attorney and a former diplomat. I'm pleased to be here and to ask some awkward and pointed questions. I had been assigned to the CIA's consulate at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in the late 1980s. I was chief of the visa section. I had been repeatedly ordered by high State Department officials to issue visas to people who frankly did not qualify. They had no ties either to their own country or to Saudi Arabia where they were applying. At the time, I thought this was strange. At the time, I thought this was money going under the table to buy a visa from the American government. I learned later from three good sources, one of whom was Joe Trento, the noted journalist, that these people were being brought to the United States after being recruited by the CIA and its asset, Osama bin Laden. They were brought here for terrorist training and sent back to Afghanistan to fight against the Soviet Union. What I would like to know is the Visa Express program a continuation of this policy in another guise? In Central America, according to Celerino Castillo, the DEA officer, it was standard practice for the CIA to slip its people into a pile of visa applications that were being brought to the American Foreign Service Post by a travel agent. and they were simply brought into the country and no questions asked. Well, when I was there, I asked questions about what was going on with these people. Was the Visa Express program a way of getting past awkward questions from people like me and a way of getting past immigration in the United States? We need to know, and I would like the people doing the investigation of September 11th to give us a good, clear, truthful answer as to what was really going on at the time. Thank you.
Now I'm going to just take a minute to set up for our PowerPoint presentation. Okay, if we can dim the lights and lift. Okay. We seem to be having some technical difficulties. So we'll proceed without the PowerPoint presentation. I'm not sure why it's not working, but maybe some of our tech people at C-SPAN could help us out. There we go. Thank you. As each day goes by, we learn that this government knew a whole lot more about these terrorists before September 11th than it has ever admitted. This from former 9/11 Commissioner member Max Cleland, who is no longer with the Commission. Now I'd like to invite April Gallup. April and her son were wounded at the Pentagon on September 11th, and she's going to read a brief statement. She's going to introduce herself and read a brief statement from another family member who wanted to have her voice heard here today.
I don't have my step box, so I'll have to pull the mics down a little bit low. Great things come in small packages, you know. Again, my name is April Dawn Gallup. My son's name is Elijah Gallup, and we are both survivors from the attack on the Pentagon. So where were we? We were inside the building on the E-ring when we experienced one of the most tragic incidents in history. As the plane hit, of course, being on the inside, we had no warning whatsoever that there was even an emergency. There was no alarm. There wasn't anything that went off. When the supposed plane hit the building, fortunately, and I think it's largely why we're here today, we were blown in the blast and then covered under 4 floors and walls of debris. At the time, where it touches me the most is at the time my son was only 2.5 months old, and it was my first day back from maternity leave, and I was, returning into work, and he was also blown in the blast and covered under 4 floors, walls of debris, along with everything that was in the building on that day. Personally, I wouldn't want even my worst enemy to suffer or even witness incident. We had the unfortunate ability to actually see how many of the family members died that day. Many died a instant death, but some was very slow and very tragic. Before I go any further on what my questions are, I'm also representing Miss Judith Jackson Rice, who couldn't be here today. She's the mother of Joshua Scott Rice, and he was on the 105th floor of the North Tower. And I'm going to read a part of her statement. My patient has worn thin. Not only has the administration refused to cooperate, but by putting Philip Zelikow on the commission and to appoint him executive secretary shows that the Bush administration has from the first tried to hide, cover up, confuse, and mislead the American public as to what was known and what our security should have on the weeks preceding 9/11. It is time to insist that Mr. Bush, Mr. Cheney, Ms. Rice, and others step up and answer the questions not only of the families so devastated by this lapse in judgment, but in order to show that our system of government is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you. And that statement alone is something I'm sure everyone can agree. And my major concern is everything about 911 has been a cover-up and foggish, right down to the charities, right down to the independent commission. We can't get public testimonies. First, there's an agreement for a private testimony. And I want to clarify something. The 911 families have not become angered vigilantes. We just simply want to know the truth behind 911. And we're just simply asking that those key individuals would provide public testimonies to respond to many of the questions.
My name is Jules Aronson. My sister, Myra Aronson, was on American Airlines Flight 11. And I, too, want answers, and hopefully these questions and others to the Commission would provide that. So one question is, why didn't foreign intelligence information about planes being used as weapons get into the hands of the National Security Advisor, and why didn't it get into the hands of the President? And that is really one of the important questions. Thank you.
I'd just like to say that this slide here is a quote, partial quote from 9/11 Commissioner Jamie Gorelick, who, when she heard the questions posed by Mindy Kleinberg of the 9/11 Family Steering Committee, said that they represented a roadmap for the Commission in its work. Many of these questions are drawn from the questions prepared by the 9/11 Family Steering Committee.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Rosemary Dillard. My husband, Eddie A. Dillard, was murdered on board Flight 77. In addition, I was working for American. I have been working for American Airlines for 29 years, and I was directly responsible for the 4 flight attendants that were murdered that day. So I have a very deep need to know answers. And what I'd like to start with is, why didn't...
You can start with your own question.
Oh, okay. No, I'll start with this one. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay. Before an audience of the American people, the Commission must ask President Bush in sworn testimony the following questions. Beginning with a transition period between the Clinton administration and the Bush administration, ending on 9/11/01, specifically, what information, either verbal or written, about the terrorist possible attacks and targets did you receive from any source? And included in that, what information was provided to the airlines? I was a manager for the airlines, and how come the airlines didn't know anything about it? This would include briefings from the outgoing Clinton officials, the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the DOD, and other intelligence agencies. Foreign intelligence, governments, dignitaries, or envoys. National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice, Richard Clark, the former counterterrorism czar. And after seeing 60 Minutes last night, I'm sure this question remains in all of your hearts. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abraham Scott. I am a retired Army officer of 20 years. I lost my wife of 24 years, Janice Marie Scott, in the Pentagon that day. She was a GS-13 supervisor budget analyst. She was in an office that who lost 32 of their 36 employees. They had just moved there less than 2 months prior to the attack, and she left behind two daughters, Crystal, which is, she's currently 26, and also Angel Marie, which is 18 years old. There are a lot of questions that I would like to ask the Bush administration, and of course, one of them I would like to ask in terms of, as Commander-in-Chief, from May 2001 until September 11, 2001, did you or any agent of the United States government carry out any negotiation or talk with the UBL, an agent of UBL or Al-Qaeda? During that same period, did you or any agent of the United States government carry out any negotiation or talk by any foreign government, its agent or official regarding the UBL? If so, what resulted from those talks? And that's conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm William Rodriguez. I'm the president of the Hispanic Victims Group. I'm the last person to come out of the North Tower and one of the few people that was pulled from under the rubble. On 9/11, I have one of the few master keys that opened all the doors in the building, and I was being followed by the fire department as I went up and opening the doors and getting the people out. I had some problems prior to, after 9/11 with the investigation, the way that it was being done, especially with the FBI, because I gave them a couple of tips, and they didn't actually, up to this point, they haven't acted on any of the tips that I gave them. And as a matter of fact, when I was pulled from the rubble, I have a police radio, and I have to go 8 times, 10 times directly to the office of the FBI to ask them to remove the radio from my possession, because it belonged to probably one of the cops that died on 9/11. And after so much trying, the Port Authority police picked up that radio. So there's been a lot of problems with the investigation. And I want to ask the president that why haven't you come forward with all the information the commission has requested from you? Why the constant clashes between your office and the panel over access to intelligence and the disponibility of officials? Is anything on the records from NORAD that has been subpoenaed is able to help the panel's investigation? It should be voluntarily turned over without the necessity of a court rule. A follow-up log from the FBI tips before and after 9/11 should be given to the panel. And in conclusion, we the people affected by 9/11 ask you, Mr. President, that in the same way you have used the disaster of our images for political campaign to be forward and use that information to get to the bottom of what really happened, and in that way we will learn how to avoid and manage the future emergencies that will happen after 9/11. As we know, as Mr. Clark said, they use everything on all the information from 9/11 to shift the concentration into what happened with Iraq, and taking that amount of resources, put it on Iraq instead of Al-Qaeda. So we want that to be open, transparent, and to come forward with all the information that we have requested. Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify, UBL is obviously Osama bin Laden. Now we'll start back with April. Oh, I'm sorry, Henry. So just introduce yourself.
Good afternoon. My name is Henry Hughes. I'm the father of Chris Robert Hughes, who was in the South Tower of the World Trade Center. I'm here today to really support the process of accountability. I think there's a lot of questions that have to be answered, and I think people should come forward in both the Bush administration and the Clinton administration and answer the questions. It's a very simple thing. Would like to know the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We've all heard that many times. When we have our children and we raise them, we teach them to tell the truth, and I would like to think that adults in this situation should be held to the same standard. A very simple thing. The whole truth and nothing but the truth. I think that's not a lot to ask, since this was probably one of the most horrific things that has ever happened to our country, at least in my lifetime. And the question for the President, what connections did our government have with the terrorists prior to 9/11? State Department negotiations with Taliban for the pipeline through Afghanistan, or interaction with the Taliban and/or bin Laden, CIA training, and the arming of the terrorists. And like I said, I don't really think it's a lot to ask for the Clinton administration and the Bush administration to come forward and tell the truth. A very simple thing. Thank you.
Okay. I'll take that. My question is for President Bush, Vice President Cheney, Ms. Rice, Secretary Rumsfeld, Secretary Powell. Was there a plan in motion to invade Afghanistan and Iraq before 9/11? If so, was access to oil and gas a strategic motivation? And a little background for the reasoning of that question is because there is a lot of assumptions in regards to, business involvement, believing that a lot of that motivated a lot of what's going on. And therefore, a direct answer to the question would alleviate a number of assumptions.
Well, this question concerns, foreign state sponsors of terrorism. Now, why did Mohammed Ahmed, director of Pakistan's Secret Service, order Saeed Shikita to wire $100,000 to hijacker Mohammed Atta? And yes, well, why indeed? And what was Mohammed Ahmed's relationship with Al-Qaeda? And indeed, what was the nature of Ahmed's meetings with Powell, Tenet, Armitage, Representative Porter Gross, and others just before 9/11?
Well, as we continue on, my question is for Mrs. Rice, who is refusing sworn public testimony. Prior to September 11th, what information did the intelligence community provide to the National Security Council on Al-Qaeda, activities and infrastructure inside the United States? Prior to September 11th, did the National Security Council ever consider alerting the American people to the internal threat from Al-Qaeda? What happened? Did the National Security Council ever consider enhancing the U.S. border controls by strengthening the watch list programs, alerting the FAA or the airlines, or inspecting cargo containers on a larger scale? If so, what happened?
Other questions will be posted at 911citizenswatch.org, 911independentcommission.org. These are far from a comprehensive listing of questions and areas of inquiry. There are other areas of questioning not raised here, but that need to be addressed, including the Amtrak attacks and the collapse of World Trade Center buildings, among others.
My question of President Bush is, if he was here as the Commander-in-Chief, the family members of the Pentagon and American Airlines Flight 77 was in the Assistance Center in the Sheraton Hotel in Crystal City for almost 4 months. And President Bush, as the Commander-in-Chief, did not have the gall to come over to the Sheraton and express his personal condolences to the family members in that hotel. And as a veteran, I can attest that at least 90% of the 125 victims of the Pentagon were either directly or indirectly related to the military. And I found that very appalling in terms of him as the Commander-in-Chief not coming over there and expressing his personal condolences to the family member. The other question?
No.
That's it? Well,
Just
that's
one
it.
more by John.
Okay.
Just trying to move quickly here. Just like to invite co-founder of 9/11 Citizens Watch, John Judge, to ask a final question before we look at some of the resources where we have begun to found some of the answers and that we have passed on to the 9/11 Commission. John Judge.
The specific question that I wanted to raise, and this is based on a lot of work that we have done as independent investigators and researchers on the case, and all of our material has been turned over to the Commission, along with questions like this that we've been raising consistently at every one of the hearings. Given the fact that there were multiple prior warnings from foreign intelligence to U.S. intelligence, and given the fact that there were reported forewarnings, specific forewarnings to government officials, Pentagon officials, the mayor of San Francisco, and others not to fly on 9/11, and given the fact that there was enough consciousness of the possibility of planes attacking buildings that special precautions were made in the summer before at the Genoa summit, special drills were conducted at the Pentagon for such a situation. The security had told me in 1999 that they had cameras and radar on the roof in case they, meaning Muslims that he was speaking to me about, tried to run a plane into the building. Why was there no even standard, much less emergency, response in the nearly hour-long scenario from the time that the first plane evidenced either hijacking or some trouble in the air? Why was there no military response, NORAD, FAA response, or other response from defenses within P-56 or the restricted areas in the Pentagon on 9/11? Why didn't the warnings lead, and the preparations and the drills lead to a response that day?
Now I'd like to identify several resources that people have brought forward to our attention and that we have in turn passed on to the 9/11 Commission. The first two have been entered into the formal record or archive of the 9/11 Commission, and I've spoken to members of the Commission who have actually used the timeline in this case as a resource in their work. This is a timeline that's been developed by a gentleman named Paul Thompson and many colleagues from across the country and around the world. It's available at www.cooperativeresearch.org. I've printed it out. Here it is. It's organized in themes. It's obviously also by date, but you can search by themes, and that's a project that's ongoing and being refined and added to. The War on Freedom by Nafis M. Ahmed from the Institute for Policy Research and Development. This was a book that was published over a year ago. It's being published overseas. I understand it's virtually a bestseller, close to a bestseller in Italy. And this book, too, has been given to each member of the Commission. Tomorrow, Citizens Watch will formally present copies of The New Pearl Harbor, Disturbing Questions About the Bush Administration and 9/11. This book was written by a eminent theologian and teacher, philosophy teacher, named David Ray Griffin. The foreword was written by Richard Falk, Professor Emeritus from Princeton University, who was quoted, "This is an extraordinary book. It is rare indeed that a book has this potential to become a force of history." We have copies for interested members of the press, advanced copies provided by the publisher. This is an ad campaign that will begin today in the DC Metro system. It is a 2x2 poster that is going to be placed in, and if we could dim the lights, this is a 2x2 poster that's going to be placed in the entire metro system here in DC, calling for Bush, Cheney, Rice, Clinton, and Gore to testify publicly under oath and stop the stonewalling. It will run for 4 weeks and reach hundreds of thousands of people in the DC area. This is an ad we placed in the Washington Post today in the federal section, a quarter-page ad. Behind you. Could you dim those lights? Top level. Essentially, we're calling for these top-level officials to come forward and testify. There's a sample of, again, several questions that, of many that we have raised here today. So thank you for being here, for coming, and for listening. I'm sorry this ran as long as it did. I wanted to have more time for questions. I'm certainly willing to stay beyond the hour of C-SPAN's coverage to answer any questions you might have. But we hope you'll join us. We hope the viewers out there in C-SPAN watching us now will join us to ensure that we see full accountability, transparency with this commission, and sworn public testimony from top officials, from the president on down. And we are also here calling publicly for the resignation of the Commission's Executive Director, Dr. Philip Zelikow. He has gross conflicts of interest, or at least appearance of such, in his close ties with Ms. Rice, the National Security Advisor of President Bush. They've co-authored a book. He was also part of the transition team. Now, the Commission, in all fairness, has recused him, or he's recused himself, from issues dealing with the transition team, which is the transition between the Clinton and Bush administration. However, he sat in on meetings with Richard Clarke in which the threat of al-Qaeda was clearly elucidated for the members of that, security team, national security team, in the process of transitioning from one to the other. When the members of the 9/11 Family Steering Committee heard that he was in this meeting, they immediately called for his resignation. He has given testimony in his own investigation. We find this outrageous, and we believe that the very integrity of the Commission is at stake here, and that he should resign immediately. So I want to thank each and every member, family member, and survivor of 9/11 who've come here and shared their stories, read some of the questions that we prepared, that we drew from the 9/11 Family Steering Committee, and added some of their own. And we all deserve the truth. They deserve the truth. We all deserve the truth. The future and our security is at stake here. Questions?
You mentioned Richard Clarke. I wanted to see if you or any of the other members of the survivors have read the book or excerpts from the book and have any reaction to it.
Well, actually, we saw 60 Minutes last night, and we were very, very shocked with what we saw and the amount of information that they had and the accusations that he's giving to the administration. So we're waiting for the book that is actually being released today to see what is in the general idea of what has to do with the commission itself.
Has that shaped your impressions at all, what you've seen, and how so?
Oh, yes. We are more, well, first it was very emotional. We were very emotional because Here we have a top-level administration official saying that they knew something, that they took the information and they went away with that information and they tried to tag it to the Iraqi people. And all of a sudden, all the focus that they have on Al-Qaeda was shifted to the wrong direction. So we were very, very hurt by that.
One of the things that we feel that should be made public, as much of it as possible, perhaps in redacted form, is there was a July 5th meeting that was called for by Richard Clarke. At this meeting were members of the Secret Service, all the typical members that would join a high-level national security meeting in the White House. In that meeting, he warned of a spectacular attack that would occur with little or no warning and cause mass casualties. Those are the words extracted from what was leaked from that meeting. So clearly, there's information there that we hope we will hear from, what can be released without compromising sources and methods at the upcoming hearings over the next 2 days, because we understand that Richard Clarke is one of many top officials, including Tennant Powell, Madeleine Albright, Sandy Berger, and others who are testifying.
What is this group? Who are you? What's your background? Just asking if you can tell me about your group. Who is the group? Who are you? What's your background? You're from Rhode Island, I gather. And how did you get involved in this? What were you doing before all this?
Yeah, I've most of my life I've not been what I would call a very political person or very politically involved. Have a strong set of values and concerns, but generally that has never found expression in any kind of political environment. This is not politics. This is about an effort to get to the truth about what happened on 9/11. My personal background is as a professional sailor. I'm a yacht captain. At the time of 9/11, was a fall season and essentially wasn't sailing at the time. And I read what piqued my personal concern that we weren't getting the whole story about 9/11 were early reports that there was some insider trading, that someone had some foreknowledge and some specifics of the attack enough to place short put options on United and American Airlines. And these were reported across all the mainstream press, and we've yet to see a full report of the investigation that was launched by the SEC after the revelations of the alleged insider trading that one expert named Phil Erlanger estimated were in the billions. So that's what piqued my interest. But prior to my work with CitizensWatch, I was a sailor and did a variety of other things. I ran a disabled sailing program in Newport, Rhode Island.
Should I say something to that? Okay. I'm the co-founder, John Judge, with Kyle, and just brief background on me. I'm from the D.C. area. I grew up in a Pentagon family, civilian employees of the Pentagon. And I'm an independent researcher and investigator, and I was interested in the situation from day one, from 9/11, when the blast shook my windows, when I had seen on local TV for almost a half an hour they were announcing that a plane was coming toward D.C. And I began independent investigation and research at that point and have continued it. And there's a national and even international network of researchers that contribute to the timeline and that I've been in touch with by email since then, trying to dig out what we can. But we don't have final answers. What we have is many unanswered questions, and we have a commission in process that needs to be addressing these fully and addressing them transparently and releasing the information that's not classified yet.
First was his question in regards to Mr. Clarke. We hope at some point he'll be able to meet with the families. We found a lot of his information to be very enlightening. And his statement is more so a reason why President Bush and others should publicly testify so that we could hear what he has to say.
Anything in particular strike you? What was it?
Everything was particularly striking to me in that I find him to be a credible witness, his information to be credible, and everything that he spoke touched in a certain way. So it's very important. We need to hear from those top officials. And to respond to your request, the 911 Citizens Watch has been very essential to the 911 families because many of us, a large number of us, are still on the road to recovery. And they've had the awesome ability to do what we cannot find the time to do because we spend a lot of times in therapy, the doctors, you know, things of that, et cetera. So they help us work and get a lot of the information that we just simply do not have that time to really put into do. So they've been a high asset to the 911 families.
Do any of you have strong opinions about George W. Bush's political ads that refer back to 9/11? And do any of you object to professional actors being used in those ads? And would any of you have suggestions for political ads, future ads being put out during this presidential political campaign?
Yeah, we are. I represent the Hispanic Victims Group and the Victim Support Group, and we can say that the majority of the percentage of the people that we have, around 3,600 people, they all were very, very hurt. They found it obscene that they used those ads for a political reason, to use it as a political campaign when they haven't even given the opportunity to the commission to be interviewed and answer the questions directly of what happened with 9/11. So we are very, very angry that he's using that and marketing his presidency as he did everything on 9/11. No, we don't like it.
And to emphasize what he said, it's not just, you know, that particular organization, it's all organizations. I don't think any 911 family member should be left out as far as any ads relating to 911. And it's very distasteful that not even heads up or so much as how would you feel, you know, about that particular ad or, but then again, that's how it's pretty much been about a number of things, from the charities to the memorials to ads. There's not much input, or it's been little or no input from the families, and that's where it becomes insulting.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, go ahead.
You said you gave a couple of tapes to the FBI.
No, tips.
I'm sorry, tips. You gave a couple of tips to the FBI. Can you tell us anything about those?
Sure. I have no problem with that since they didn't act on it. Number one, I felt that I met with one of the terrorists 2.5 months prior to that, around that time. Not that I met, but I saw him in the building. I don't recall the name of the guy, but he was in the area of the bathrooms, asking how many bathrooms were in the area. And that's information that they should have acted upon.
You said about 2.5 months before.
2.5 months before that, yeah.
So if you're correct, at that time they still didn't know what means they were going to use to attack the building. That would mean they still didn't know at that time they were going to be using planes.
It could be that, or it could be they were looking for another way to bring the building down with extra explosive. Because one of the things that I felt, and that I haven't said it publicly yet, is that when I went up the stairs, I stopped on the 27th floor to left all the firemen that were with me, the whole unit, and I kept going up to the 33rd floor. On the 33rd floor, I had a closet with cleaning supplies. As I was getting masks to give the people that were coming down the stairs, I heard a lot of movement going on the 34th floor, which was a closed floor because of construction. It was burned out, and there was no access to that floor. And I heard heavy equipment being moved on top of that floor. And I was like, oh my God, somebody's there. And it's not a regular person because it's heavy equipment. They're moving heavy equipment there. And as I get to the 39th floor, opening the doors for people to get out, building 2 gets hit. When it gets hit, we heard the rubble coming down and the 65th floor collapsing, because we heard on the radio we lost 65, meaning that the 65th floor went down in a domino effect, coming down up to the 44th floor, which was the sky lobby. Now, my belief up to this point, they haven't given me any other way to see it, is that maybe in the building there were other kinds of explosives being set up prior to that. And they haven't come forward with that information.
Yeah, to add to a previous question, how are you calculating your publicity efforts so that you're present while the president is campaigning and demanding specific answers to these specific questions in addition to this event today?
Well, we don't know. We're actually doing the outreach, and the press doesn't have a subpoena power, so you have to get the information of, you have to do your own investigation when it comes to everything that is 9/11. And when it comes to the political campaign, we have a lot of people here that are Republican, and they feel very, very offended by what's going on with the investigation. So, you know, I said that because it came out in certain media, with Rush Limbaugh, for example, saying that we were people that were manipulated by the Democratic Party, and it's not like that.
Someone over here had a question.
My question is media related. Let me begin with a expression of sympathy for the families that were impacted, and thanks to 911 Citizens Commission for doing this very important forum today. In 1986, when Libya was bombed and it came out there was a disinformation campaign, Bernard Cow resigned in protest, and when then Secretary of State George Shultz was pushed into a corner and had to respond to the disinformation campaign, his response was to quote Winston Churchill, former Prime Minister of Britain, in times of war, the truth is so precious, it must be attended by a bodyguard of lies. That being the case, from one administration to the next, there appears to have been this penchant for a bodyguard of lies around issues, controversial issues of this nature. We have a lot of cameras here in the press club today. I wonder to what extent the Fourth Estate has been doing its job in asking the tough questions of the government and you know, holding people accountable in terms of this very important inquiry. What is your read on this?
Well, we certainly encourage. I mean, the answer to that question is sitting out on the other side of the table here. But we certainly encourage the press to listen to the families and listen to the researchers and go after these questions and to help us push the commission. And I think that they've done that to some extent, but not perhaps as much as we'd like at different points. So we're glad to have the audience today and the chance to be on C-SPAN and get these questions out to the public. Someone here had a question.
Yes, you'll be. I'm sorry. You'll be hearing from the secretaries of Defense and State, both past and former, tomorrow. Yet you feel, and you have a list of questions that you've given out today. Do you believe that they can't answer those questions? After all, many of them, they were often in National Security Council meetings when these issues came up.
You're saying that they can answer them?
I'm asking if you believe they can't answer those questions.
Cannot?
Because, yeah, cannot. I mean, I believe you're also pushing for testimony from others as well.
Yeah. Well, I think there may be issues that they consider too sensitive to answer, and they would claim national security, although invoking national security in a situation where the rest of us have to live in national insecurity begs the question at times. But I don't think these questions are impossible to answer, but I think the answers to them might begin to get at a deeper history, a historical context to what led up to and has followed 9/11. It might, as the truth often is, not be as comfortable for everyone, but it may enlighten us in ways from which we can determine policy. One of the critiques we have made of the Commission is that they are taking panels of testimony about policy on intelligence structure, on security, on all different sorts of homeland security and other issues prior to what appears to be their last topic, which is what happened on 9/11. And to us, that's totally counterintuitive. Unless we can find out what happened really on 9/11, and the theory that we've been given does not hold up in its particulars when looked at critically. The thesis that we've been given down to the starting level of who was actually on the planes and what happened falls apart when you go into the details, and so we'd like them to be able to answer these questions, because some of these questions might begin to get at the truth.
If I can follow up, do you believe that they're not? It is on. If I could follow up, do you believe these questions are not either going to be asked or answered tomorrow and Wednesday?
Well, we would hope that the Commission pays some attention to the families and to us. We have submitted questions in the past, and at least some of the themes have been broached. The families have also been contacted by Commission staff with answers to some of the questions they've raised, but the families have not always been satisfied with the answers. We would hope that if this is a commission in a democracy to get at the truth, and they've said they'll leave no stone unturned, they'll go wherever the evidence leads them, then their responsibility to the American public is to ask the hard questions and not to just put people up, ask them soft questions, and have a sort of show up there, but it has no meaning. They should be asking probative questions. At the beginning, we were among the groups that pushed for them to take testimony under oath. And they took the position that perhaps people would be more forthcoming if they weren't under oath, which again we thought was counterintuitive. And so, we want them to be as public and as transparent as they can. And also, when they're done, to release as much of the information on which they're going to base their conclusions as we can. We had this joint inquiry report come out with 28 pages redacted. And it had to do with nations that were involved, possibly, but we're not allowed to know what those nations are. All the way back to the very first evidence that we were supposed to have of what happened. The special report white paper that Colin Powell promised was then withdrawn. So the American people have never really seen much of the evidence in this case. And even the hard forensic evidence that could be released, footage of the Pentagon attack, for instance, there's a lot of non-classified material, and we can't even get them to release that. This is a commission, because it's under the legislature and because of the way the law was written, does not have to have, it doesn't follow the Federal Advisory Group Act, so there's no way to have a formal advisory group to this commission investigation, which is often done in other inquiries. It also, because it came out of the legislature, is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So we can't apply to this commission to get any of the documents that they're looking at or the materials. And all of this goes the other way from what ought to be a sunshine process. And this was a critique of the commission on the shuttle as well. Because people said, why don't you put out the evidence you're finding on the shuttle and let the whole nation and all the expertise, scientific and engineering expertise in this country take a look at it and tell you what they can. And when you do open that door up, I think people will come forward. I'm sure you heard stories today that you didn't know about, and there are many more among the families and among the public.
On the question of the Pentagon,
excuse me, sir?
You allege on many of your websites, your website and some of the others that you're linked to, and in this book that you distributed today, it's also alleged, New Pearl Harbor, that American Airlines 77 did not crash into the Pentagon, and the Pentagon was not struck by a Boeing 757, but by a missile. On what are you basing that? And what do you think happened to American Airlines Flight 77 and all the people on it?
Well, I don't know if you looked at our website closely. I mean, some of the websites do raise this question. The best evidence that we've seen and work that I've done with eyewitnesses is definitely that Flight 77 went into the Pentagon. And there were people that I know that were familiar with the plane that went to the crash site and saw the pieces of it. There are other sites, and it is mentioned in the book. I think it's mentioned in the context that he's not sure of this, but that evidence is around. There was a best-selling book in France that tried to put it forward. But we have not taken a position in support of it. We do know that some of the critics are raising it, but I think our job is not to prove the obvious, but rather to get on to what's not visible. So we have not taken a position. I don't know what you saw on the website that made you feel so that Flight 77 didn't go in the Pentagon, but we have just left open. I mean, Kyle, before he started this, was with unanswered questions, and we've left open to people to raise questions that they have, and those should be answered by a probative process.
Well, this book that you're recommending that you distributed today says the photographic evidence in sum provides several reasons to conclude, not question, but conclude that the Pentagon was not hit by a Boeing passenger plane, but was instead hit by a military missile. When you make charges like that, don't you think you kind of discredit your approach to this entire matter?
First off, sir, we're not making that charge. John has quite eloquently suggested that we take an issue with that case. The bulk of that book makes a very strong case of many of the other areas that we've addressed in this conference. And we believe that the best way to put that particular question to rest is for the Pentagon, for the Commission, to release video or photographic evidence of the hit. Let's put it to rest. Let's put these distracting questions. If there was a plane, let's see the video evidence of it. There is also a piece of evidence sitting in the Smithsonian, something that fell off the plane into the back seat of a woman's car. She got home in a state of shock. She found this piece. She made a little box with an American flag inside of it, and she gave it to the Smithsonian. It very easily could put that particular question to rest if that piece of that plane, which I believe came off the plane when it hit a lamppost on its way into the Pentagon, was analyzed for its resins and the fibers in that particular piece. It was not a piece of aluminum. It was some kind of carbon fiber or composite. That could put the issue to rest. I think only through forensic evidence and a full analysis of the evidence can we resolve that question. But clearly, those kind of questions, I believe, are somewhat distracting when there are many other questions that the family members and others have raised that have yet to be addressed, and the record of stonewalling, of appearance of conflicts of interest and so on that have plagued the Commission from its start.
Do you feel the...
I'm sorry, sir. Can you wait for the mic?
I want to ask, do you feel that the severe limitations placed on the presidential briefs regarding their access, only allowing Mr. Zelikow, who is, as you all have said, is severely conflicted, working for the Bush transition team and other areas and so forth. What is the problem with not allowing the whole commission to see all of the briefings? Because I believe it was Gorelick and Zelikow were given access, and then they got to choose which briefs out of the 3,000 or 4,000 were the ones that were most important, and then the chairman and the vice chairman got to see the briefs which they chose. Now, Zelikow is not even appointed by Congress or the president. He's selected, by members of the commission. So what we're saying here is that those two individuals, the chairman and vice chairman, got to see the briefs, and then the notes were taken. A 17-page report is kept at the White House, edited by White House lawyers. So there's severe restrictions. Do you think that what they're trying to do is to keep the presidential knowledge, prior knowledge, before the attacks away from the American people, so that they will not scrutinize his actions, his strange actions? And for example, why General Myers stayed at his desk while all 4 planes crashed, while Secretary Rumsfeld stayed at his desk and never entered the war room until the 3rd plane crashed and hit his building, and why the president sat at the elementary school even after the reporters rushed out to cover the story.
Well, to answer the first part of your question, Tom, every member of the commission has top-level security clearance. So we believe that the entire commission should see the presidential daily brief of August 6th, indeed any presidential daily briefs which pertain to 9/11, which pertain to the warnings that came in, that documented the warnings that came in from foreign intelligence services. We don't feel it's appropriate for Philip Zelikow, with such close ties to the Bush administration, who sat for many months on his Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, to be reviewing the presidential daily briefing. And those notes are then edited and so on. So, in fact, Bob Kerrey, who joined the commission after Max Cleland left, said that he was so unhappy and dissatisfied with the current state of affairs relative to access to the presidential daily brief that he was considering resigning. And he had just joined the commission. And I believe Representative Romer has also said, has voiced some frustration about the lack of access. As to the second question about foreknowledge, or exactly, obviously we don't know what was in there. We do know that that briefing was titled, and most people in this country don't know, but it was leaked that the title of that August 6th briefing was Bin Laden Determined to Strike in U.S. At one point they tried to drop the "in" suggesting that this was an overseas threat. This is another one of the misleading statements that have come from the Bush administration since 9/11, that it was an overseas threat, that the buzz, the noise in the system was an overseas threat. No, it was a threat to domestic targets in the U.S. And in foreign intelligence agencies, President Putin was interviewed on MSNBC and said that there were, Arabs training to be pilots to use planes as weapons and target, buildings in the U.S., high-value targets in the U.S. So we don't know, but we know that there was a very clear warning of an imminent attack, and this particular brief mentions hijackings. What else it mentions, we simply don't know.
As a follow-up, having attended the hearings myself, at least most of them, the issue of these frantic briefings, it seems as though some of the members of the commission, Jamie Gorelick, perhaps the most preeminent or prominent one, said that there were frantic briefings going on June, July, and August. What I'm trying to get at here is that if these briefings are known to the public and they say that there were Arabs training as terror, training to take flight lessons, and everybody and the government knew about it, and there were the issue of the individuals that were in the country and so forth, if they were all there, then how is that going to affect what the president, when people go to look at why was he sitting there, why did he continue, why did the top general on United States military soil stay in his office and talk to Max Cleland while 4 planes crashed when he knew about the first one in the first place? And we haven't even touched about the issue of when they first knew, because it's obvious that the plane was hijacked at 10 minutes after 8 o'clock in the morning, 20 after it turned south 110 degrees. So they knew it was hijacked. That's 2 hours before the last plane crashed. Now you're telling me Operation Vigilant Guardian with planes heading all up and down the coast, no one was able to do that, to intercept that plane in 2 hours? Impossible. So what I'm saying here is that, do you think that the president would be able to justify his actions if the public knows what he knew before the attacks, before 9/11 and during the attacks?
Well, I think we can't know what justification the president would have. We just have these standing questions that belie a normal national command response level. And we have Rumsfeld saying he was sitting in his office doing papers until the plane hit. I mean, that's the Secretary of Defense. We have Myers, acting Joint Chief of Staff head, knowing about the first plane hitting but going into a private meeting and no one interrupting him apparently and coming out, according to his statements at the end of it. President Bush reportedly being told by Andrew Card, the staff member in Florida, about the second plane hitting, and then apparently not responding, although we don't know specifically what Card told him. And yes, this is after a long period. By 8/24, we now know, all of the federal agencies had a phone bridge open. The FAA...
There's some discrepancy about that. The FAA released a statement at the second hearing which established the phone bridge at 8:46.
Okay. Well, then there's a conflicting statement, but there were reports from the FAA towers and indications of air emergencies as early as 8:18. And there was interagency communication. When the FAA first testified, they didn't have any timeline at all to present to the commission. And then they came forward with one that said that they finally declared Flight 77 a hijacking as late as 9/24. That's well into the scenario. They knew the plane had turned around well before that. And whether or not it was a hijacking is not the issue, because the FAA NORAD response goes to any air emergency, any situation where a transponder is turned off, communication with tower fails, plane takes a deviant course for any period of time, stops taking commands from towers. You have live people there, you have live people down where it's going to hit, it becomes an air emergency, and NORAD responded. They responded 67 times in the year previous to that to normal air emergencies in a timely way. And yet that day, apparently, the entire structure broke down, even though they were involved in Vigilant Guardian and on-top readiness at many bases. The command structure failed to carry this. The only statement we've gotten from the National Military Command Center that I've seen was on 60 Minutes at the first anniversary, where General Montague said, "We didn't respond right away because the FAA was tracking 4 seemingly unrelated hijackings." Well, that's a very curious quote to me. I don't understand why hijackings have to be related before you respond, or how you would determine it. Although if you have 4 on the same day and you haven't had any for about 10 years, you might consider them highly related, but even if they aren't, what's the difference? Don't you respond to the first one, you wait for a second one? It's a nonsensical statement to me. And I think these are the kinds of things that I think we want the Commission to draw out the answers, not only from the Pentagon brass and the NORAD brass, but down to the pilot level. Talk to the pilots at Otis, talk to the pilots at Langley, who they finally scrambled too late to get to the scenarios. The pilots at Langley weren't even scrambled to defend D.C. They were sent to New York, according to what they say in the book Among the Heroes. What was the defense, and why was it so delayed? And, and then on the national command level, why weren't people who apparently had been given briefings and could have known that there was a problem, in flux? I mean, why weren't they ready to move on that day? Someone over here.
Day was. How come all of the Al-Qaeda people were let to leave the country that evening? How did they get clearance to fly when all of the airplanes were supposedly grounded?
There was apparently a flight, I don't know if it was that evening, but it was within the next few days, that before commercial traffic had been restored, that included a number of members of the bin Laden family. And they were...
And over 100 Saudis. There were several flights that made their way around the U.S. picking up members of the bin Laden family and Saudis. They were then flown to Boston. This has been well documented now. Flown to Boston, and I think on the eve of the clearance for commercial flight to resume, they left the country. But it was during the grounding and I should add, without extensive briefings. So we've been keeping people for 2 years and interrogating them. But the bin Laden family members and a group of Saudis, over 100, were allowed to leave the country with would have to have been only cursory interrogations by the authorities.
Someone over here.
In your ad, you say that you'd like President Clinton and Vice President Gore to testify. How much responsibility do you all place on them for not preventing 9/11?
Well, again, I mean, we are, we're limited in our ability to draw conclusions up at that level. But I think that they were on watch during a period of the historical development of these situations. Now, many of the Clinton officials seem to be saying, Clark recently, Madeleine Albright, when her book came out, that they were in fact tracking bin Laden and al-Qaeda closely, which would seem to make sense. There are a number of people in the FBI that complained after the transition into the Bush regime that ongoing investigations that they had of suspects were called off or interfered with or obstructed. And there's many number of books about that. There's a complaint, it seems, that they were in fact maybe not responding in a military open way in the way that the Bush administration has responded, rightly or wrongly, and that can certainly be contested. But I mean, they seem to have been at least very aware and given these briefings and tried to convince the incoming transition team and the Bush administration of its importance. I think Clark transitioned into the new administration, so I don't know how you gauge, their level of responsibility. And of course, when it's a political season, everybody wants to place the blame one place or the other. It's probably much more complex than that, than just saying the guy in charge has to take all the heat, because things happen in this country. Part of the problem is the reason that speculations come up, like this gentleman mentioned about Flight 77, we're in a situation where, because of a national security state, much of the information we need is placed into a classification system instead, and it's not accessible to the public, or even if it is accessible somewhat, the media don't get a lot of it out to the public in many cases. So we're kind of in a situation where we're allowed to believe anything we want, but to know nothing, and that makes it impossible to act. And the way to be responsible, it seems to me, is to reverse that, so that we do know and we get the historical record. So as I say, I can't say, but Madeleine Albright said one question that raised for her was how they could know so much about these attackers right after the incident and so little about them previous to it. But somebody wasn't on watch.
As a partial follow-up, do you have a good estimate of the number of FBI agents or the amount of FBI hours that went into investigating Clinton himself during his last years in office, as opposed to this kind of thing?
I don't have an estimate of it. I do know the cost of, like, the Whitewater investigation alone was much greater than the amount of resources that have been given to this commission, as was the shuttle investigation. This commission has a limited life and a very small budget comparatively for one of what ought to be one of the most important events to be studied in our current history. Oh, I think they had to extend it to $14 million. It originally started out at about $9 million, wasn't it?
No, it was initially funded at $3 million.
Oh, the $3 million, yes.
And it went to $14 million, and with the 2-month extension, they just got another $1 million. Contrast that to a multi-year investigation into Whitewater, which cost 40 to 50 million, and a space shuttle, the shuttle accident investigation, which was launched immediately, and I believe was funded to the level of $50 million. So, yeah.
As my good friend John here is aware, I serve as Director of Operations for the Peace and Justice Foundation, but I am also a Muslim American, and so I'm probably the lone voice of Islam here in this conference today. It has been our position from the very outset, and we wrote our own report, and it's accessible on our website, peacethroughjustice.org, that the attacks of September 11th, to the extent that there were Muslims involved, it was a clear violation of the fundamental tenets of Islam, clear violation. But it has been our position from the very beginning that the Muslims who were involved were nothing more than bit players in a much larger, well-orchestrated conspiracy. Now, one of the major networks did I think it was either a 2 or 3 part story on major corporate multinational investigations that were impacted by that tragedy. To what extent do you know, do you have information about this? And the second related question is, outside of the Arab world, do you know of any other governments that may have in any way some nebulous ties to this unfortunate conspiracy?
Catherine Austin Fitts spoke here earlier, and I understand that she's just completed a piece called 9/11 Profiteering, where I have not read it. I don't know the conclusions it draws or the questions it raises, but I believe it's posted on Scoop Media at scoop.co.nz, and it will also be published at globalresearch.ca. Catherine was once invited to join the board of directors or the board of governors of the Federal Reserve. She understands how money works in this world quite well, maybe better than most, I would say. And so I'm very interested to hear what she has to say about that. As to the general issue of war profiteering, some of you might be aware that Kevin Phillips' book, American Dynasty, is, I think, number 2 or 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. And he documents 4 generations in the Bush family, going back 4 generations to World War I, of a clear record of war profiteering, the involvement of the Bush family, and that he examines the Bush family as a dynasty, because we've never had 2 members of the same family separated by only one president. So I would encourage those who are interested in examining that question a little more deeply to pick up Kevin Phillips' book, American Dynasty, Fortune, Aristocracy, and the Politics of Deceit in the House of Bush.
And about the Muslim situation, yes, you guys have been very affected. It's bad publicity, bad public relations. Right now, I've been in contact with the families of Spain, and they're very hurt now that the connection again is with the Muslims, and I'm going to be taking a group of 5 family members and maybe 2 Muslim clerics over there next week.
And as to your part about the countries, all we know is that there were multiple countries in the redacted pages of the Joint Inquiry Report that were referred to. There was a sort of a winking hint that Saudi Arabia was one of the countries. Another one that we have been looking at is Pakistan, especially Pakistani intelligence. I think it was brought up today about this transfer by the head of Pakistani intelligence, whose head rolled when he got back for being too close to bin Laden, of $100,000 to Mohammed Atta in August. And he was here in September, in the early weeks of September, meeting with Richard Armitage and Colin Powell and George Tenet at the CIA. And even that morning he had breakfast with Porter Goss and Bob Graham, who wrote sat over the Joint Inquiry Report, Mahmoud Ahmed. And we've been trying to track whether or not there was Pakistani. Now, I asked Graham specifically whether that was one of the countries they looked at, and he denied. But I don't know whether they have a different standard for, sort of pointing at Saudi and not at somebody else. But outside of the Arab world, I don't know. I mean, whether there was involvement of other countries or even involvement within this country at some level that we don't yet understand.
But on the corporation level, we remember that on June last year, there was an investigation, and I believe the investigation is still going in New York, that 2 corporations, General Electric and Halliburton, have $1 billion of the retirement fund of the firefighters and the police invested in countries that promoted terrorism.
I just want to say that this new book that's just come out examines this question of conspiracy and the question of whether or not there were elements somewhere within the U.S. government that were somehow complicit in 9/11. It's a very disturbing thing to consider, but he nevertheless looks at the evidence, looks at the timeline, looks at Nafis Ahmed's The War on Freedom, looks at the public record, and raises questions and examines a range of theories. It needs to be looked at. We haven't drawn any conclusions ourselves. We're just bringing forward this information to the general public.
I'd like to share a little bit of information that may be helpful. First of all, the FAA knew that cockpits were a problem back into the early 90s and didn't fix them. In 1995, following Bojinka, the FAA knew that they had Arabs over here training as pilots. I know because I worked with the FAA and I found the guy and the school that he attended. I knew how he dressed and the book bags he carried. A few days ago, a very significant anniversary passed, 18 March. A year ago, Elaine Kaplan, the chief counsel of the Office of Special Counsel, sent to the White House the report on Bogdan Dokovic, who is an FAA-validated whistleblower. The report, it contained Bogdan's original complaint. It contained a lying Kenneth Meade, who is the Department of Transportation Inspector General and former GAO official. The report, Bogdan shredded that with over 500 pages of documentation. He then rebuffed a James Loy lying document, and this was all sent to the White House a year ago. If you want to see Ken Meade's report, go onto the Office of Special Counsel's website for 2003. I think it's PR8. It's around that. You'll see it's FAA official, talks about the FAA red team and malfeasance leading to a danger to the public. At the bottom of that, you will see Ken Meade's report. That's a PDF document. Open it and read it. Ken Meade, chapter and verse, admits that they knew all these vulnerabilities in the FAA, access control, badging, cockpits, so forth, and that they did nothing. His excuse was that the FAA red team's examples or the information, and I was on the red team, could not be used because it was too much, and this is a quote, like a terrorist would do. Begs the question, what exactly was the purpose of the DOTIG? The DOT knew this, Jane Garvey knew it, Captain Flynn knew it. They did absolutely nothing. They've all been rewarded, promoted, and they're still out there. If you attended the last hearings of 9/11, Calvin Flynn and Jane Garvey and Claude Monod, who was the intelligence chief for the FAA, had 12 people on his watch list when the State Department had 60,000. I believe it was Secretary Lehman asked him, "Are you stupid?" And the room broke into applause. Claude Monod got promoted to the head of intelligence for the TSA, got a $16,000 bonus, and after that hearing just returned to the FAA. So there's a lot they knew. Look on that website. Thank you.
Yeah. I think we've got a couple of examples of what appears to be a rewarding failure in this situation where people that should have taken responsibility or taken action. And it's incomprehensible to me that this long after the Pentagon itself was hit, that there's not been a single court of inquiry or a military court-martial or a full investigation internally that we know anything about. I don't even remember a few years ago there was a submarine, U.S. Navy submarine, that surfaced and it hit a trawler in Japan and sank it and some people died. The captain of that submarine is no longer on that boat. I don't think he's even in the Navy still. I'm sure that he got in trouble for it. I'm sure there was a hearing. I'm sure there was a demotion. And that was a small matter, I mean, with a few lives. And yet nothing like that has happened. It happened after Pearl Harbor. There were hearings and court-martials, but nothing after 9/11 when the headquarters of the Defense Department is struck by a plane. We still have yet to determine what happened when the head of security could tell me in 1999 that they were on Delta Alert, their highest form of alert, because of phone calls threatening bombs in the Pentagon, and had radar and cameras on the roof to watch out for planes. What happened between 1999 and September 11, 2003, that no system of defense that worked was put into place? And what happened to the people that were responsible for doing that? If we're just going to promote them and brush it under the rug and say it's all external, then I think we're not going to learn any lessons that can get us any further out of the mess that we're in, globally and nationally as well. I guess, anybody else have a?
Thank you all very much for
Thanks so
coming.
much for coming. We have press packets too if you didn't get one.
I quit 99. I work odd, but still with the kids. Very much. We kept going to the order. You were working on it. They didn't care. I went up to Boston in 2000. Something to not carry the video. I went up and set it up. We just shredded it. Deliver that to Jerry, went to the airport, they buried it. And 1998,
Sure. I wish I could. The lawyers don't let us do that. Everybody has. The lawyers just don't let us do that. You still have a business draft. Don't say anything about that. Right. Just look at me and what do you have?
The 2000